Hello and welcome, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Alessandro Colla and Alberto Acerbis, co-authors of Domain-Driven Refactoring, published by Pact in May 2025. Alessandro has 30 years of IT experience specializing in e-commerce systems, C# development, and domain-driven design. He's also the co-author of Chronakid Domain-Driven Design and a co-founder of the DDD Open and Polenta and Deploy communities. Alberto, on the other hand, is a backend developer with a strong focus on solving business problems through software. He also works across the stack when needed and finds domain-driven design patterns an effective way to deliver value. Actively engaged in the tech community like Alessandro, he is also a co-founder of DDD Open and Polenta and Deploy. He has also been awarded with the Microsoft MVP title. Thank you both, Alessandro and Alberto, for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having us.
It's really great, and we are really looking forward to the conversation we are going to have with you about domain-driven design. But first, let's start by talking about your new book. So I'll start with you, Alessandro. Could you share the inspiration behind domain-driven refactoring and what gaps in industry practice or literature were you aiming to address?
In our experience, at least, we had many times had to maintain and evolve, have existed for years, instead of creating something starting from a greenfield. And so the idea behind the book is to try to put together in a sensible and incremental way how we approach this evolution in a complex system, in a legacy system. And of course, maybe Alberto want to evolve on that. We start with a little review of the concept of domain-driven design, because we start from that.
Yeah, Alberto, I'd like to hear what your perspective is also and your motivation for writing the book.
Yeah, as Alessandro told, is more easy to work on what we call a legacy code instead to starting with a new project and a greenfield project. Many of the time the customer comes to us and asks us to refactor something that he used because he need to create new feature, introduce new feature, and so he need a small refactor at the beginning, but it's never a small refactor, it's always a big refactor. And so this is the real inspiration and motivation.
The idea was to work on this side of the problem and also applying domain-driven design, because we firmly believe that domain-driven design can help in the refactoring steps. And so we put together this book trying to give a sense of how to apply patterns and strategies of the design with the baby steps of refactoring, because touching a complex system is always very difficult in so many levels.
Many people think that the domain-driven design is is too complex to apply from my case, but it's not true.
Yeah, and that's definitely a myth you're trying to address, isn't it, with your book? So, Alberto, the book emphasizes like modernizing monolithic systems into modular systems or microservices. So how do you help teams decide between evolving towards a modular monolith or a microservices architecture?
Good question. Normally the customer comes to us asking to transform his legacy application, legacy software into a microservices system, because, I heard my cousin, the microservices solve all the problems that we have. But transforming a legacy code directly into a microservices architecture introduce a lot of troubles, because you have to fight with infrastructure problem, because when you split your system in microservices in architecture, you have to prepare your architecture to host this application that you split or these things, and the customer normally ignores all these troubles. Also, it's not physical splitting of your old application in many microservices. Before, you have to find the right boundaries around your business, small business problem. And then when you discover the semantic boundary around your subdomains, using the domain-driven design terms, you can move your monolith, your mesh monolith, in a good monolith. Modular architecture is an example of a good monolith. And then also, if the work you can split your modular monolith into microservices. But splitting a monolith in a microservices is a technical and business decision that all teams comes together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will add that.
Alessandro, yes, please.
Yeah, I will add that. So the answer, I think, that is not to move to a monolith or a microservices, but what we try to do usually is to, as far as possible, to start with a modular monolith, move from the old monolith to a good monolith, as we love to call it. We love monoliths, okay? To a modular monolith first, so that we can sort through all the confusion and try to still make the features more easily to implement the feature, because I put some kind of order inside my monolith. And then, if it's really necessary, if the cost-wise and all the other, as Alberto was saying, all the other infrastructure complexity that usually the customer overlooked, because obviously it's not his job to know these things. And then we can move to a microservices system. So our monolith obviously has its limitation, but at least for our experience, my experience, and I also one of the Alberto, it can cover most of the business requirements. And many times we didn't move to a microservice solution.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that very clear sort of summation about not giving up on monoliths, actually. So
absolutely not. Baby steps.
Always baby steps.
Yes, that's always the most sustainable way to improve things. So Alessandro, now my next question, I'd like to start with you. In the book, you cover applying both strategic and tactical patterns practically. In reality, how do you recommend teams prioritize which patterns to apply first when refactoring a large legacy system?
Okay, I think there is not a specific pattern to apply before another, but instead starting with the strategic pattern of domain-driven design to understand the business. If I have to find something, I will say the ubiquitous language. I will start with strategic pattern, with the ubiquitous language, so to understand the business and with what I'm dealing with. Okay. And then starting design the application or touching my monolith, applying the tactical patterns. So I don't have a pattern. I would say start with strategic pattern, ubiquitous language, understand the business. When you fully understand the business and you have explored the domain, then move to the tactical pattern when touching the code. Also, in our book, we didn't delve too deep inside the strategic pattern. It's just a couple of chapters as a review for the patterns that we think are helpful and meaningful during a refactoring process. There are so many good books already on the market that we didn't find of value writing again the same thing that people smarter than us has already written. So what is important for starter is to explore the domain, apply strategic and then tactical.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alessandro. And before I move on to you, Alberto, I'd like to tell our viewers that the books and they are referring to have been cited within Domain-Driven Refactoring, which they've authored. And I think your book, I don't agree that people smarter than you have written those. It's just that you've sort of added to the body and filled the gap that existed. So, Alberto, would you like to add to what Alessandro said on the question of the prioritization of patterns?
Okay. As Alessandro told, our book is not aimed to cover the strategic and tactical pattern, what they are, and so on, because more iconic books exist for this. Back to the beginning of this interview, I said that many people think that domain-driven design is too hard to apply. Our intention is to demonstrate that if you use the pattern that domain-driven design show us to refactor your legacy code, you can move from a bad situation, I can say a bad situation or a mess situation, a big ball of mud, in a more structured code or system when you can easily apply or introduce new feature without the fear to introduce bug or regression or something similar. So the most important, as Alessandro said, is explore the situation using ubiquitous language to discover the boundaries and then apply the tactical pattern. If really you want to follow the steps that they want, follow the steps that they have to show. Okay, it's more. It's not just a technical book. Domain-driven design is not just technical pattern; it's also principles.
Yes, and that brings us very nicely to the last question in the segment. Alberto, I'll start with you. I wanted to ask you if readers could walk away with just one principle from Domain-Driven Refactoring, your book, what would you want it to be?
Okay, probably the last that I told. The domain-driven design is not just technical pattern; is more principle. So apply the principle correctly, even learn, study the pattern itself, because you have to understand that explore the problem, explore the domain is the real essence of domain-driven design. When you learn and you understand the problem, you can propose a solution to the problem. And then you can use the pattern of the domain designer to really apply in the good way, this pattern and solve this business problem. Probably this is the, not just, okay, I have to do this. I often repeat, there isn't a pattern or solution pattern for domain-driven design. Okay, I solve a business problem with domain-driven design. I clone the solution, I clone the report, and then every time the customer asks me, can you apply domain-driven design to my solution? Oh, yeah, I clone the last solution and I reply, no, it's not possible.
Yeah.
It's more an exploration.
Yeah, Alessandro, what's your take on this?
To add to what said Alberto, I think that what we try to do, obviously, is that it is really, really important to focus on the problem before doing so. I never get tired of repeating this, because one of the first mistakes that I did when I started having my hands dirty with domain-driven design, CQRS, event sourcing, was obviously I'm a developer, so I started with something I'm comfortable with. So I started designing my aggregates, my entity, my values, object, and I totally forgot to first understand why I was building this kind of classes, for what purpose, and I end up with a mess. So we try the first chapters of the book, maybe a little bit boring because we love code, we love practical stuff, but we want to be sure that the reader understand that the principle have to be applied, the principle have to be understood, and then everything comes naturally.
Yeah.
But obviously, everything comes with a cost, because doing complex things costs.
There are always trade-offs, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really
Okay. So now it's a good time to move to our next segment, where we are going to talk a little bit about domain-driven refactoring and practice. So I'm going to start with you, Alessandro, and ask you, How is it best to integrate meaningful refactoring work into feature-driven development cycles, especially when business stakeholders are under pressure for constant delivery?
This is the 1 million question, the $1 million question. I think that as in life, the answer is balance. You can't have both the thing at the same time. So you have to balance features and refactoring because obviously every project has its own history and situation and variables that are different from every project. So you have to understand that. And obviously the stakeholder press to release new features because the system has to sell the service or whatever it is used for. But this happened to us a lot in the past, I would say, Alberto, when you have to fix bugs, but you have to release new things all at the same time with the same amount of money and time at your disposal. So what we end up with usually is to try to implement the new feature with refactoring steps of the system that this feature is attaching. So trying to balance these things, maybe we will release less features in a cycle, but at least we are able to insert, as usual, with baby steps, little step of refactoring. So I insert this new feature and also this new feature touch, I don't know, this bounded context, these classes, this service, and we try to refactoring. And step by step, we move and we keep up to date the system. And obviously, is time consuming, this operation, but allows to have some kind of balance between the request of the stakeholder and the needs of the maintenance of the system to have some kind of continuity.
Right, got it. Alberto, would you like to add to that in any way?
Yeah, agree with Alessandro. The problem or the first motivation because a customer asks us to refactor an application is because he has difficulties to introduce new features because he has a mess monolith, a big volume mode. Introduce new feature is difficult, or introduce fear to introduce bugs and so on. So he asked us to, can I refactor the application and so I can be safety when I introduce a new feature? It's a long way to the top. I remember a famous song because you have to create before a safety net of tests. We starting with end-to-end test. We have to be sure that during our refactor, the response to our API, for example, remain the same. And then we can introduce a small refactor together with the new feature that we are introducing in the application. Especially, as Alessandro said, at the beginning of this style of work, the time is very long. It consumes a lot of time. It consumes a lot of time at the beginning because you have to prepare all the infrastructure of your test, the application to accept this refactoring and so on. But moving into the next sprint, more and more over in the work, you can see with yourself all the time you deploy new feature that the work worth it.
Right.
And so this is, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So my next question also, I'd like to start with you, Alberto. When applying DDD during refactoring, how do you deal with organizational structures that do not map cleanly to bounded context? Any advice for winning broader team and management support?
Oh,
These are complex,
difficult,
complex questions.
very difficult question. And think Conway's law and welcome Conway's law. Yeah, when you introduce this concept in team, and for team I mean not just a technical team, because if you want to apply domain-driven design, you need that the team. In the team, you have the stakeholder, the customer itself, the user that consuming your application, the developer that write the application. And the most difficult part is first convince the board that this is the right path to follow if you really want to refactor your application in a better way. And so you have to split the code and create the right flow of communication between the teams using the pattern that domain-driven design provides, like anti-corruption layer or all the other patterns that you want to apply, and convince that you splitting the monolith in modular in more modules, but each of these modules have to communicate with the other ones because you are not create more 10 application. You get a one application splitting in more modules that have to communicate with each other. And this is the hard part, my personal opinion of the refactor. Right, solving technical problem is hard, but is always possible. Solving communication and business problem is the other part of the question of our work. Personally speaking, I don't know what Alessandro thinks, but probably the same.
I'm with you, absolutely. I'm with you. So I think that to give a name, context mapping is the thing to start from. Understand, as Alberto was saying, we have to understand the boundaries everything works on, and then start first with the code because it's easier, and then move on the people. Because when you have your code improved without compromising the communications between components of your application, maybe services or what else. And also another thing that is important is the business must be with you, because they are the one that put the money in, and the everything it must be shared by everyone. The changes must be shared by everyone, and also the business.
Yeah. So some diplomatic skills are definitely.
Yes. Because
as Alberto was saying, the code is easy. It's the easier part.
Yeah.
Maintaining a good a good level of communication of okay, I'm happy to work with this team is more important than write code.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's Alessandro. The next question, I'll start with you. What tools, techniques, or frameworks do you recommend or wish existed to make domain-driven refactoring easier and more reliable in practice?
Oh, okay. I think I'm saying something that not everyone will agree with me, but in my opinion, at least, there are actually not real frameworks to do domain-driven design in the true meaning of the word. But in my opinion, there are lots of good libraries that leverage use some of the complexity in writing the infrastructural code of doing something with domain-driven design, CQRS, and something like that. For me, it's more important to apply, as Alberto was saying, the testing part, the safety net. When I'm doing refactoring, I need a strong safety net, because when I'm going to touch something that the knowledge has been forgotten, is always very difficult. Also because we are talking about something that is in production, and we can't break it and say, okay, whatever, next week I will fix it. You are not allowed to do that. So you have to build this safety net and end-to-end test, unit test, but also that is really important. We talked about a lot in the book, and there are also examples in the code that come with the books. The fitness functions, the test of the architecture, because we are developer, we are lazy inside, and also the IDE are extremely willing to help the developer solving their problems by just with one click. You can include all dependencies, all the projects to reach your needs, but sometimes it's not as easy, and you should not use some dependencies because you're breaking the boundaries. And so having architectural testing can ensure that no one break these rules. And fitness function, I think, could be a huge help in maintaining these boundaries, these bounded context inside our application. And then obviously, of course, unit tests to prove that your code is correct.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Alberto, would you like to add to that?
The question around the framework pros and cons is a long story, but fortunately, there aren't domain-driven design compliant framework. Apply domain-driven design for a solution is a kind of tailored suite. So each time you have to write the balance, and how to apply the right patterns inside a new solution, a new business problem. And for sure, what you can advise before starting to touch the code, please prepare a safety net. Please don't touch your code, because at the beginning of the project, you don't know nothing about the business. We are dev, we are architect, but we are very strong in our field, but we don't know nothing about finance, about IoT, about whatever you want. So before to have the idea because I solved a similar problem before, for sure I know how to solve this problem. No, it's not the same. It's a title suite.
Yeah, got it. So thank you for that. That brings us to the end of this segment. And now let's move on to talking a little bit about architecture and design trends in the moment. And Alberto, I'll start with you. Many teams today are moving away from microservices back to modular monoliths. What factors should influence this decision, and how can domain-driven design principles guide a successful outcome either way?
Probably the right question, it depends. The question is not when to switch from monolith to microservice or vice versa, one to the other, but whether the cost of microservices is really worth it. What means that good monolith is really capable of meeting most business demands. If you have a good monolith, probably you can solve most of the problem that you have, at least at the beginning of your story. Also, when you discover that your business is growing, that you really need to physical splitting your solution because, I don't know, the basket on the web, on your portal, on your e-commerce, really need to give up because you have a lot of customers. You are lucky businessman that you have discovered the right reset to sell all your item on the web, and you really need to grow up just the basket. Okay, this is the time to split your monolith in microservices. But you have to know that with this operation, you introduce many problems like infrastructure, have to distribute your microservices, the splitting of your database. And I know that there is an eternal fight between dev and DBA around a database, but when you split a database, you have to work very carefully because it's a very, very important thing in your application. So I repeat, it depends. It's not one is better than the other. When you need one and when you need the other one.
And handle with care.
Handle
with care. So, Alessandro, would you like to add to what Alberto just said?
Yeah, the short answer is coastal simplicity. But one of the first projects I worked in when I started with domain-driven design was obviously a monolith, not of course a modular monolith, but we did our best to build a decent monolith with the knowledge that we had at the time. And the difference, I think that the limit is also how you scale: horizontal scaling, vertical scaling. With the monolith, obviously you have vertical scaling. And what we did was, as the business was growing and growing really fast, we started increasing the machine that were hosting our website, our e-commerce. And the customer, when we went to the business, say, okay, we are reaching the limit of our application. We need to do something a bit disruptive, like removing some services from the monolith and have them some way autonomous, so some kind of hybrid microservices. And they say, but it's not simpler if we increase the RAM, the RAM of the machine, and it wasn't possible because it didn't scale anymore. So we end up, to make the business happy, to replicate the e-commerce in 2 other machines with all the problems of having 1 database and 3 clones of the e-commerce around. And then after that, we moved to the microservice solution with all the problem but right now it's still working and we are happy with it. But yeah, I think that the factor are cost and simplicity. As if you have something that works, but obviously if you understand when you are going, you can plan ahead the move to microservices, and so it will be not a problem like we had, because at the time we didn't know what we were doing. You have to start somewhere. But with thinking now, I guess I had to be more firm with the business that we needed to move to a microservices solution at the time.
Yeah, got it.
I learned my lesson.
Yes, and that's how you're here now, and and you've written this book. It comes out from all these lessons you've learned over the many years. So, Alessandro, my next question, I'll start with you. How do you we talked about bounded context before, and you covered this quite a bit within your book. How do you recommend teams identify bounded context during refactoring? What signs suggest that the original boundaries may need to evolve?
The answer, of course, is ubiquitous language. I think we already said that 5 times. You have to understand the problem space. You have to be in the problem space, and then the communication between teams. And after you understand the business, the domain, you can move and then propose solutions. The real understanding of the business process is what allows us to draw a semantic boundaries inside our application. And from then, I can move on with the teams, with the communication, etc. Because obviously the semantic boundaries is not the same as physical boundary. Like, for example, microservices. Usually, often, 99% of the time, the microservices represent the bounded context. So their boundaries more or less the same. But sometimes we can have, and I saw that, a microservices that maps more than one bounded context. So we have one microservices and 2 semantics boundaries, because it was a more practical. They made their choice. But we can have the other way around. We can't have 2 microservices mapping on the same bounded context. And of course, the semantic boundaries evolve hand in hand with the business, because obviously the business always evolves. And our application must do the same, align with the business. And so we have to keep constantly check our semantic boundaries and evolve with it. I think that before touching anything, obviously we have to also to speak with the other teams that are working, because the communication between bounded context is essential. And so just because I'm working on my bounded context doesn't mean that the changes in my semantic boundary doesn't involve other boundaries. And so I'll say that another time, we have to be in the problem space a lot before doing anything. We have to understand what we are doing. We have to understand what we are dealing with, and then touch and evolve. But yes, the semantic boundaries evolve with the business, and we have to map it, understand it using context mapping, ubiquitous language. These are the tools that we have in our toolbox to do that in an efficient way.
Yeah. And Alberto, would you like to add to that? To what you have said?
The discussion around the evolving of the boundaries or the model for your application is a very hot discussion nowadays in the domain-driven design community, but also in the architecture community, generally speaking, because many and new ideas are coming. When you create a model of your business problem, you simplify the business, the reality, your business in a class, technical speaking. And when you make this operation, you do this with the idea to resolve a small problem, like Alessandro said, because the ubiquitous language that you use to talk with your stakeholder helps you to identify the problem and to solve this problem. But because it's a business problem and the business is evolving continuously, also your model eventually change in the future. And if you have split your solution in a good way, you can change the model or at least remove and replace the model with a new one, because the modular architecture provide this solution for you. Or I can remove a module and replace with another one without replace all the whole application. Probably this is the really good effort to apply bound and contest and to understand, because it's important to apply bound and contest in an application, not just because it's a technical solution, but because it helps you to keep in your application lives in the years.
Yeah.
You can keep up with the business, basically.
Keep up with the business.
Keep. So now let's talk a little bit about event-driven architecture pitfalls. And Alberto, I'll start with you. Event-driven systems are often promoted for decoupling, but they can introduce their own complexity. What common mistakes have you observed, and how can teams use domain events effectively without creating a distributed monolith?
Whoa. I love event-driven architecture. Yes, you say the event-driven is mostly sees as the solution to decoupling all our application. But as always, it's not the solution itself, the evil. It's not event-driven, the evil. It's how to apply event-driven that can be in a good way or in a bad way. For example, in CQRS, there are two different kind of events, domain events and integration events. And these kinds of events has two different scope in your solution. A domain event is an event that can live just in a bound and contest. You have to keep your domain event inside the bound and contest. You cannot share your domain event with the other bound and contest, with other microservices, if you want to split the application in microservices. Because when you share your domain event with another one, when you need to change, because it's not if you need to change, but when you need to change your domain event, you have to communicate to the other one, oh, I need to change my domain event. Please modify your microservices, because from now I publish a new structure of message that is different from the previous one. And this is not a decoupling situation. You are distributing monolith. If you use your domain event inside your bound and contest, you can modify it. And okay, when you modify a bound and contest domain event, I have to modify some classes, I modify some behavior, but inside my bound and contest. When I need to share some information to the other one, I use an integration event, because I can separate the content of a domain event from the content of an integration event. So I can change my bound and contents without the necessity to change the integration event content. And so I can change my model without tell Alessandro, oh, Alessandro, I changed my domain event. Please modify your bound and contents, your microservices new module, because I need to publish my new version of the application on this Friday, usually just before the weekend, because it's the right time to publish your solution, your new solution. And Alessandro had the weekend really because because I publish a new version of message I communicate with you, with him. So event-driven is not the evil. It's how to apply event-driven, but not just event-driven. Probably all the pattern and all the situation. Yes.
Okay. Alessandro, what would you like to provide your opinion?
Alberto was talking about events that evolve. Obviously, also integration events can evolve, or of course, but at least should be evolve less than a domain event. But there are many strategies to cope with event versioning. We had an entire chapter of these kind of solutions, because in our book we don't show the solution. We show just our solution to things, and at least to give something concrete to the reader, and he may agree with us or not, but this is how we do things, and we are still searching for the truth. But I did all of these mistakes, of course, and way worse. The problem that at least I have is that I'm lazy, and so I try to recycle things, because why I mean, I have a domain event, and Alberto in his bounded context need the exact same copy of what I have already have. Why do we have to waste time and effort to create another one that is just a copy paste of this? And then we will see in 6 months. We will see again in 6 months and see what happens. And these are the things, that the pitfall that I see so many times, because then they come back. Okay, we can't evolve it anymore because there are too many services involved. If I change this, everything broke. It's a problem. So we have to fight our laziness. At least for me, I'm speaking for myself, of course.
Okay.
But I have to fight this, because you have already everything, or everything that is already done. Why I have to do some more works? And sometimes I forgot to think in the long term, and I just try, maybe because I don't have time, I don't have money to do this, and I'm forced to do the cheapest, to choose the cheapest solution, that is to reuse things. But we have to fight these kind of things. I think most of the problems comes from this situation.
Yeah, right. And, sort of maintaining this sort of theme of like hard lessons learned. My next question for you, Alessandro, is based on your experience, what are the biggest mistakes developers or teams make when trying to apply domain-driven design in refactoring projects?
Okay, I will start with all the mistakes that I did.
We already like
More or less, when I started with domain-driven design, it was 2012, and I started with a big bang. I started with domain-driven design, CQRS, event sourcing, all together, and it was the first mistakes. Trying to put together so many things, so many complex things that I didn't know. And of course, just as Alberto said before, domain-driven design, and I learned it the hard way, domain-driven design is not a technical solution. It is a technical solution, but more, at least for me, are more important the principles that comes with domain-driven design. And we have to embrace them and apply them. And then we apply the tactical and the technical part of domain-driven design. And I end up in my first project, I end up with the anemic domain. I end up with a lot of classes that I called aggregate root, that were just properties without any behavior represented. And for example, also when I implemented CQRS, I forgot how the event-driven application impact also the interface, the user interface. I remember this e-commerce. I was working with a colleague of mine that was a UX expert, and we started drawing and working on the product page of the back office where people should insert all the products that have to be sold online. And we started designing this interface with all the field, title, meta description, prices, and just one big button with written save. And when I was trying to apply events of these 50 fields, I started to understand the meaning of things. Just one button to save, and which field have changed, why have changed, what was the question, what was the why of the user. And so we moved to task-based UI. We moved to task-based UIs. We put more than one save button because we grouped the fields mapped to the meaning of the user. I changed this because the customer have moved, why have moved, and my classes start to implement the behavior of the application. And I see nowadays that people still do this kind of errors, but of course you have to start from somewhere. And if you don't have some examples, a lot of documentation, at least for me, it was very easy to make these mistakes. And you can't start from scratch after 1 year when you realized that you built something wrong. So I think that the mistakes, and also events that, because I'm lazy, I had events that bring two concepts together. And at the time when I wrote it, for example, was price, update price and quantities. And it makes perfect sense when I wrote this event, these commands. But after 6 months, of course, price and quantity diverge as a concept. So if you have an event with a hand inside, stop, think about it, and maybe there are two events. Because the end usually is, at least for me, is a red flag, because I did this kind of mistakes. There are lots of small things that I did that became a problem on the long run of my application. So I learned to stop, think, try to keep up with more than one solution before starting doing something, talk to the team, what you think, and came up. Usually the first two solutions, I don't remember who said that, but the first two solutions usually are wrong. The third, maybe. And we have to move. And then you can code.
Yeah. So Alberto, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you have seen teams or developers make?
Did you have plenty of hours of time to listen all the mistakes that I made in the past, and for sure I made in the future?
Let's just pick the biggest one or two.
Applying domain-driven design, especially at the beginning, the sentence was show me the code, because especially at the beginning, there was very nice books that describe and details all the patterns, but how to apply this pattern was very, very difficult. And so each of one tried to create his own solution, and especially at the beginning, we introduced domain-driven design in wall solution. That is not the good idea, because applying domain-driven design pattern as a cost, applying CQRS as a cost, and if you try to apply CQRS everywhere, like me, my first project, a big project, when I try to apply CQRS is the new golden era of the software, and CRUD is just for old boy, and I'm a new boy, and so I have to apply CQRS everywhere. And I discovered that each time that the customer asks me a new feature, I have to write a lot of code, test, how to test, because also how to test a CQRS solution is not easy. You can not just apply a TDD in a classical way. You have to
test events.
Beginning, how to can test in this solution and so on. But as always, when you made something wrong, you learn something from yourself. And my first very big experience was to create a portal to buy and sell funds just for banks. And with a lot of communication to communication the bank. You buy this, you sell this one. The cost of your fund is this, but the change of the stock market is now has updated the cost and so on. And you discover that you have to apply domain-driven design just when you need to apply domain-driven design. For the rest of your solution, generic subdomain, support subdomain, okay, stay calm, write the same code that you learned to write in the past, and so on. At the beginning of your career, just when you finish the study that you start to work, you don't know nothing, and you learn a lot of pattern, and you want to apply all the pattern that you know, because, okay, I'm strong, I'm very strong. But at the end of your career, when you are good enough, the curve of your applying pattern decrease, and you apply just the pattern that you need to apply in the right place, not all the pattern everywhere. Probably this is the hard lesson that I learned.
Yeah, no need to show off with patterns.
I just remember that one of the awful things that I did in the past, it was to put a variable is valid inside my aggregates, because so to check if the aggregate was valid. So I was allowing to have something that was in an incongruent state around my system, because okay, I just need to check if it's valid when I need it, and it can be in an inconsistent state all around my system. It was terrible, very terrible.
Yeah. If you can, at the beginning of your career, you write simple code. When you are a mature or a good developer, you write
when you have made a lot of mistakes.
I don't have a lot of mistakes. Yeah. When you have made a lot of mistakes, you write easy code. That is not the same. Easy code is not the same as simple code. Easy code is difficult to create. Simple code is easy to create, but difficult to modify, to change. Yes, to maintain. Yes, probably this is my
takeaway.
Yeah, takeaway. Yes, my takeaway.
Yeah, brilliant quotable quote actually. Now, Alberto, let's talk about the future a little bit. How do you see the field of domain-driven design evolving? Will trends like AI-assisted development or low-code platforms affect how we approach domain modeling and system refactoring?
Very good question. As for sure, Alessandro, remember last year at Explore DDD, Evans introduced exactly this topic, how AI involved in domain-driven design in the future, because for sure AI will be a part in domain-driven design, not just in the future, but nowadays. You can, personally, I use all the tools that LLM provides to us to explore domain. Generally, I try to upload the documentation that customer provide to us before to starting the problem and starting to ask some question and us to try to design business process, reading the documentation that I provide to my LLM and so on. And at least I try to ask, can you provide a list of events that describe this process and name me the event in the past participle so I can use in my code? For sure, this process doesn't replace a business expert. is just a way to reduce the distance between me as developer and the business architect as expert of the business that you provide me, or ask me to help him to find a solution.
Because the business expert is not always available.
Yeah, is not always available, and using an LLM or another AI tools helps you to identify the right language that you can use to build the ubiquitous language and find the right way to communicate with the business. Because, as I repeat, as I said, I talk and I express myself with the technical language, and also the business use a technical language that's different from mine because it talks about IT, financials, e-commerce items, and so on. And we need to find a common way to understand each other before to find a solution. So for sure, AI can help us to explore domain and design first big solution. But for now, you probably also in the future, you have to spend more of your time to learn yourself the pattern and the way to create something. Also, the use of Copilot, just for create an example, to write code. If you ask to your AI assistant to write code for you, it provides a solution that you don't know how he learn to write this code. But if you write code and you ask to your assistant can you read my code and suggest me some better solution? Okay, it's a different way to cooperate with your AI assistant.
Yeah, that's it. Right. So, Alessandro, what's your opinion on this, on the future?
I agree that AI has already taken over the world, I would say. The problem that I see, AI is an invaluable partner while writing code, but you have to know what you are doing. If you know what you are doing, AI can help you so much in writing code. The problem of AI right now, in my opinion, of course, is that AI reasons only about what it knows and not about what it doesn't know.
Yeah.
And so, as Alberto is doing some kind of experiments with documentation, trying to discuss with the AI to have different point of view, etc. But the reasoning behind is based on what he knows and not what he doesn't know. So it can be creative, let me say it like that. And also the code part is based and trained on the code that we wrote in the last 40 years, and half of them is legacy code. So you have to understand the output of the AI. The AI is programmed to answer. Also, if it doesn't know the answer, it is programmed to answer anyway.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to understand if it's wrong or right. And
if it is an hallucination or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And also from a domain-driven perspective, the understanding of the business, just because a business seems similar to another one that you solved in the past, that doesn't mean that they are the same. And so you have to be focused on these kind of things. But AI absolutely is a tool that I can't live without it anymore.
Yeah.
For the good and the bad parts, obviously, because I'm becoming dependent more and more often from the AI.
Yeah, it's really changed how all of us work, really. Okay, and so that brings us to our final question for this interview to wrap up. And Alessandro, I'd like to ask you, what key piece of advice would you like to give teams embarking on domain-driven refactoring? Are there any major do's and don'ts you would like to highlight?
Buy the book.
The book.
Okay, jokes aside, I think before writing a single line of code, be sure to understand the problem. Be sure to understand the domain. I repeat myself, but that is the core principle. And then remember that domain-driven design is made of principle. Is for the majority of the part is composed by principle that allows you to understand what you're doing, and you have to apply them, understand them. And also we have lots of code in our book, so you can at least start from something and see how we solved our problem, how we approach the problem. And at least I think there is a big value in that, because when I started there wasn't much code, and so that's why me and Alberto are focused on the practical part, because we wanted that back then to have as many code as possible to at least and I understand better the code than the theory.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Alberto, what would be your one piece of advice?
The last part that Alessandro said, if once upon a time the question was, show me the code, because that was the very question once upon a time. Nowadays you have many occasion to compare yourself with other one, how to apply domain-driven design pattern, how to explore domain, how to apply principle about around domain-driven design. Many communities are born in the last years. Each time Alessandro and I encounter other colleagues also if they are not really our colleagues. We like to talk about the practical side of applying domain-driven design. Because
how did you do that?
Because at least for me, but for Alessandro, my daily work is find and create a solution for our customers. And at the end of the day, you have to write a piece of code that you deploy in a cloud solution or a server in canteen of your customer, or in the basement of your customer, in any place. And this piece of code has to solve a problem that the customer asks you to help him to solve, because he need to automate some piece of process, and you need to provide the best solution that solve the problem, not just because you write code because your machine is able to understand your code, but because your colleague is able to understand your code. So the final advice is don't fear of domain-driven design. Try to apply the pattern baby step each time. Read our book for sure. and experiment on it, because
and with this you should
it seems simple to say. It's more simple than what it appears, but it's more simple. It's not so domain-driven design is something that is too far from away, more complex. It's too far from me. No.
Okay.
And also for the refactoring steps,
Yeah,
you can do it. You have to do it applying the correct way.
Writing code each time is a big effort in terms of time, of cost, money, and so on. So please write your code in a way that you can live with your business, and you don't need to rewrite the entire application each time. Just a small piece of the application when the business needed to change, and the application for sure need to follow the business and change itself.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
it's not free. It's not free. Nothing is free.
Nothing is free. Everything comes.
Change just a piece of code is a small cost. Change all the applications, a big cost.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you, Alessandro and Alberto, for your valuable insights and for sort of taking us through this journey that you've had with domain-driven design, all the hard lessons you've learned and what you've sort of covered in the book. It's been a real pleasure having you with us today and having this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for you.
Thank you.
And for our viewers, if you want to learn about more examples and gain more real world insights, do check out their book, Domain-Driven Refactoring. We provided the link for you in the description below. As you must have understood by now, this is not just a theoretical book that's based on existing literature. It has evolved from the experience what these authors have had in the real world and all the lessons they've learned. So it's a very valuable piece of work. And so do check it out. And I'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.
Bye.
I'm going to.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.